Well, I wasn't planning to quote my father. I didn't know that clip was going to be in there, but he was absolutely right. It is not work what we do. It is a joy. Sometimes it is done under the toughest, as we've seen, most horrifying of circumstances. But it is a joy, and as we've also seen tonight, it is a responsibility. I first of all want to recognize my Fox family, many of whom have come here tonight, and I very much appreciate your making the effort to do that. I want to thank my wife, Lorraine, who has been on this journey now with me for the last 21 years. I want to thank the ICFJ for this award. As you've heard tonight, this organization does great work supporting quality journalism around the world and in this country, and I am very proud, especially after I've heard the stories of my fellow award winners, to be included in your ranks tonight. I'm especially delighted because, as you've heard, my first boss, and maybe the best boss I ever had, was Tom Winship. And Tom was one of the founders of ICFJ. As you saw that picture of him, he was the editor of the Boston Globe, and he was straight out of Central Casting. That picture to the contrary notwithstanding, he generally wore a bow tie and red suspenders. He hired me straight out of college, and one of his hallmarks was how he encouraged young reporters. I think most of the reporters here tonight have had a Tom Winship in their past. But what sticks with me is something else. Tom had that remarkable ability that great editors have to see around the corner. I'll never forget, back in 1971, Tom convened a meeting to discuss what would be the big stories that year. With the Vietnam War raging, most of us talked about that, or the upcoming presidential race with Richard Nixon seeking re-election. Tom agreed those would be important, but he then brought up something that we all missed, that none of us were talking about at that time, and that's the economy. As the year progressed and we saw Nixon take the country off the gold standard and impose wage and price controls, I wondered at Tom's remarkable feel for the news even before it happened, and I asked myself, how did Tom know? You've heard stories tonight of journalists around the world facing challenges, even danger, as they report the news. While I would never compare us, myself certainly, to reporters in Pakistan and Syria. Hell, as my Fox family knows, I consider it a hardship if I am assigned a room next to the ice machine. Journalists in our own country face our own headwinds these days, and that's what I want to talk about tonight. But let me be clear, because whatever side you're on in the debate over journalism these days, you're not going to like some of what I have to say. Let's start with a basic fact. President Trump is engaged in the most direct, sustained assault on a free press in our history. Since early in the campaign, he has done everything he can to delegitimize the media, attacking us institutionally and individually. And I think his purpose is clear: a concerted campaign to raise doubts that when we report critically about his administration, that we can be trusted. According to something called the Trump Twitter Archive, and who knew that something like that even existed, between January 10th and the end of October, Mr. Trump tweeted about, quote, fake news 141 times. One tweet stands out. On February 17th, the president tweeted this: "The fake news media, failing New York Times, NBC News, ABC, CBS, CNN, is not my enemy, it is the enemy of the American people." And that was precisely his point. If we report negatively about something he's doing, we are hurting the country. Reince Priebus, then the White House Chief of Staff, was my guest on Fox News Sunday 2 days later. When I asked him about the president's tweet, he complained that, yes, we covered what Mr. Trump did, but, quote, as soon as it's over, the next 20 hours is all about Russian spies. I answered, you don't get to tell us what to do any more than Barack Obama did. He whined about Fox News all the time, but he never said we were the enemy of the American people. But don't take it from me. Listen to Bill McRaven, a Navy SEAL for 37 years who was the head of all U.S. Special Forces, the man in charge of the missions that captured Saddam Hussein and that killed Osama bin Laden. It turns out McRaven graduated from the University of Texas with a degree in journalism. He's now the chancellor of the UT system. And after the president's tweet, he told his students, "This sentiment may be the greatest threat to democracy in our lifetime." Remember, this is a man who fought the Soviet Union. This is a man who fought Islamic terrorism. But when I asked him about his comments, he said this: "Those threats brought us together. Both the president and I swore an oath to the Constitution. And the First Amendment to that Constitution, the First Amendment, is freedom of the press. When the president says the media is the enemy of the people, to me that undermines the Constitution. So I do think it is a tremendous threat to our democracy." It turns out McRaven may have understated the threat. A Politico poll a couple of weeks ago found that 46% of voters now believe that major news organizations make up stories about President Trump. A Newseum Institute poll in May found 23% think the First Amendment, quote, goes too far, and 74% don't think fake news should be protected by the First Amendment. That's the easy part of what I want to say tonight, at least for this audience. The next part isn't, but for those of us in this room, the next part may be the most important. There's an old saying, even hypochondriacs get sick. And even if President Trump is trying to undermine the press for his own calculated reasons, when he talks about bias in the media, about unfairness, he may have a point. Hear me out on this. On November 10th of 2016, 2 days after the election, in effect 1 year ago tonight, here was the banner headline across the front page of the New York Times: "Democrats, students, and foreign leaders face the reality of a Trump presidency." This was the lead paragraph. The American political establishment reeled on Wednesday as leaders in both parties began coming to grips with 4 years of President Donald J. Trump in the White House, a once unimaginable scenario that has now plunged the United States and its allies and adversaries into a period of deep uncertainty about the policies and impact of his administration. Reeled, coming to grips, unimaginable, plunged. Could they have come up with any more buzzwords in a single paragraph? On February 16th, this was the lead on the CBS Evening News. "It has been a busy day for presidential statements divorced from reality." A week later, this was the lead: "The president's troubles today were not with the media, but with the facts." On August 2nd, this was the report from CNN's White House correspondent: "This White House has an unhealthy fixation on what I call the 3 M's, the Mexicans, the Muslims, and the media, and their policies tend to be crafted around bashing one of those 3 groups." And here was a tweet on August 18th, a tweet not from the president, but from a White House reporter for the New York Times: "Would you keep working for a boss who consistently refuses to distance himself from virulent racists, anti-Semites, and white supremacists?" Now, I'm sure that some of you hear those remarks and think they're spot on. But ask yourself, honestly, do they belong on the front page of the New York Times? Do they belong as the lead of the CBS Evening News? Here's what I think is going on. I believe that some of our colleagues, many of our colleagues, think this president has gone so far over the line to bash the media, it has given them an excuse to cross the line themselves to push back. And as tempting as that may be, I think it's a big mistake. We are not players in the game. We are umpires or observers, trying to be objective witnesses to what is going on. That doesn't mean we're stenographers. If the president or anyone we're covering says something untrue or does something unreasonable, we can and should report it. But we shouldn't be drawn into being players on the field trying to match the people we cover in invective. It's not our role. We're not as good at it as they are. and we're giving up our special place in our democracy. There's enough to report about this president that we don't need to offer opinions or put our thumb on the scale. Be as straight and accurate and dispassionate as we first learned to be as reporters, just the way Tom Winship taught me to do the job so many years ago. Thank you for letting me get some things off my chest. Thank you again for this evening and this award. And thank you, ICFJ, for backing strong, solid, assertive journalism all around the world. Thank you.